Dear friends and patrons of the KOBZAR Book Award, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you this evening to the 9th biennial KOBZAR Book Award virtual ceremony. The road to this event has not been without its hiccups. After all, the original plan was for an in-person event at the Winnipeg Art Gallery, but COVID forced us to shift online. Interestingly enough, the 8th KOBZAR Book Award Ceremony in Toronto was one of the last in-person events many of us attended before the world went into lockdown. And now the 9th ceremony will hopefully be one of the last fully virtual events. The original date was also delayed when on February 24th, 2 days after the filming of this event, Russia invaded Ukraine in an attempt to eradicate the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian identity. The Ukrainian people fight on, and so must we. We acknowledge the overwhelming support of Ukrainians and friends of Ukraine throughout Canada in response to this devastating war, and we encourage you to maintain your support for the Ukrainian people. The need for our financial assistance and moral support has never been greater, as the war shows no signs of ending. But the role of the Shevchenko Foundation has also never been more important, as we redouble our efforts to ensure that Ukrainian culture in Canada not only continues to thrive, but also serves as a reminder to the world of the strength, passion, and creativity of the unique and distinct Ukrainian nation. We thank all our donors for your continued support for our mission. Tonight's event is another important step in the expression of our culture and identity. This evening, we celebrate Canadian authors who have creatively shared historical narratives and personal experiences that contribute pieces to the puzzle of the Ukrainian identity in Canada. Cassandra, Maria, and Angeline, we applaud your accomplishments, and we thank you for sharing your insights on the experiences that have shaped who we are today, our diversity, and the common threads that make us stronger. The KOBZAR Book Awards looks forward to honoring more authors and their books featuring the great Ukrainian Canadian story. Ladies and gentlemen, the 9th biennial KOBZAR Book Award Ceremony. Enjoy the show.
Hello there, and welcome to the KOBZAR Book Award. My name is Terry McLeod, and we're coming to you today from the Winnipeg Art Gallery and from Hamayuk. And we're located here in Treaty 1 territory, the original lands of the Anishinaabe, the Innuak, the Dakota, the Anishinaabe, the Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. I'm standing here in the entry area beside the 3-story visible vault, as Hamayuk calls it, allowing us to get close to 5,000 stone, clay, and bone carvings on 492 shelves. Hamayuk is inuktitut, meaning it is bright, it is lit, and it is here today. When I first entered Hamayuk and began to look around, I felt quite at home. I had lived in Arctic Quebec, which is now known as Nunavik, for a while, and I'd worked for an Inuktitut language broadcaster called Takramit Nipengat, which means in Inuktitut, the people from the dark side of the sun who talk together. I made friends in the settlement, had families over for dinner. And then one day we got a knock on the door of this little trailer we were living in, and there was a boy standing out there. And he said, "Terry, can you help me? I need a new hockey stick." And I said, "Well, what do you need from me?" And he said, "Well, can you give me $5? And then he handed me a hunk of soapstone and said, "I'll carve this for you if you'll give me the $5, and I can go down to the co-op store and buy my hockey stick." And I said, "Sure, Molly, I can do that. And by the way, I have Molly's sculpture here today, $5 made in Saint Louis in Nunavik." As Molly's sculpture holds great significance for me, this sculpture will hold great significance for one writer, the winner of this year's KOBZAR Book Award. This is the prize given out every 2 years for the best Ukrainian Canadian writer. And this will bring significance not only to their lives, but to the lives of readers across the country and around the world, focusing on the creativity and the original vision of Ukrainian Canadian writers. Welcome to the KOBZAR Book Award. The presenting sponsors of this year's award are Zoriana and Eugene Highwarren and their Foundation of Winnipeg. The gold sponsors are the Fort Chartered Accounting Group of Winnipeg, and the silver sponsor is the Ukrainian Credit Union of Ontario. Thank you to all of them.
Zoriana and I are very pleased to be supporting the 2022 KOBZAR Award. This is the award that will be presented. We are pleased that the event is held out of Winnipeg, although it's virtual. In the past, the awards were held in Toronto, and we've supported and participated in them.
Shevchenko Foundation is so important. It's the core funding. And other organizations we've been involved in, like the Villa for You and Carpathia, have also supported. So you need both the core funding from Shevchenko, but also the local community funding from those organizations who have benefited from the community to give back.
The Shevchenko Foundation, which was started after the unveiling of the Shevchenko Monument in Winnipeg in 1961, the organization grew to go national and develop and support Canadian, Ukrainian literature, art, and culture. We're proud to see this organization develop. We've always believed that you should support the community and give to the community.
This year's candidates for the award show us a window into the personal life of John Boychuk, an internee in the Kapuskasing camp. And another view is that of a loving story of Mennonite grandparents who've lived through the chaos of a terrible mid-century calamity in Ukraine. The war years found themselves unexpected immigrants, and then the immigrant experience in Canada, which so many of us share personally or have heard from our parents. And the third is a view of the chaos and the reality of the years preceding the fall of the Soviet Union. In supporting the KOBZAR Awards, we also want to speak to all of you to say, please guard your stories, document your stories, pass them on to your children and your grandchildren. Encourage them to show the creative, interpret them, and so they can learn and retain our oral history. I encourage you to think, to be as generous as you can.
The KOBZAR Award is about writing and about challenging writing, and we'll be hearing later on from some of the nominees for the big award. But we have a new award that we call a kind of writer's challenge, and it is based on a traditional Ukrainian story called The Mitten in English, but in Ukrainian it's called Rukavichka, The Mitten in Ukrainian. Now the idea is to write a new Canadian ending to this traditional story in English in no more than 250 words, and the winner is a 9-year-old from Saskatoon, and his name is Petro Tarasov, and he is a magnificent and funny writer, and he grasped the meaning of the mitten in a really authentic way.
I chose to write the ending how I did to entertain the reader and make them want to read more. I actually had a hard time staying within the word limits. I had so much more to include. The details of my story were inspired by analyzing the artwork on the card. Each animal is carrying an item that would help the group of animals along the way. When my mama suggested that I do this activity, I felt excited because I like to write. The animals were going to go on an adventure because I like adventures and exploring. I was even more excited when my story ending was chosen to be posted and shared. It was a familiar feeling to when I did a Taras Shevchenko art piece in grade 1 that was chosen to be on display at a Vesna festival. I have been reading and writing ever since I learned how to. I often carry with me a book or notebook. I got better at writing stories in grade 3. I have written poetry, stories, letters, comic books, and how-to instruction books. I would like to continue to write as I get older. Maybe someday I could publish a book.
Ukraine, for centuries, has had a unique, distinct, and independent culture and identity, and it has been expressed through its literary art forms. Tonight, as we underscore the freedom and independence of Ukraine, we pay tribute to the Ukrainian Canadian literary forms that we now add to this rich Ukrainian culture. I also want to pay tribute to the KOBZAR Award for enriching the Canadian culture by bringing forward Ukrainian Canadian themes. I look forward to continued success for the KOBZAR Book Award.
Thank you so much, Senator Andreychuk. We decided to introduce a new competition to the KOBZAR Awards this year, the Emerging Writers Competition, and the winner of that competition is here now, Matthew Kruck.
I had a story idea set in Winnipeg in the 1920s in a cafe, but I didn't know where the story was going. And then I'd heard about the Shevchenko Foundation's Emerging Writers Award, and a character immediately came to me, an immigrant from Ukraine, and all he wanted to do was have the businessman's lunch. I'm honored to receive this award because it'll give me the motivation to get to my desk and write and write and write. It's also helped me financially because I'm going to invest that money into courses to improve my skills. I have an idea for a work of fiction that I hope one day will get me on stage for the KOBZAR Awards.
To quote a fellow Canadian author, Margaret Atwood, a word after a word after a word is power. And stories and words are very, very powerful. Even more now when we're so inundated by words, by information. A book and a story makes us stop and enter another world in a very, very unique way that some other art forms don't really do.
Presented every 2 years, the KOBZAR Book Award recognizes outstanding contributions to Canadian literary arts by Canadian authors who transport their readers into the experiences of Ukrainian Canadians.
Me trying to capture the spirit of my Baba, who immigrated to Canada when she was 17 on her own. So I realized that my Baba's story really resonates with more contemporary stories and experiences of immigration today.
KOBZAR Book Award entries can weave through fascinating moments in world history, acquaint us with the lives of both the one and the many, and introduce us to the challenges of different generations and waves of immigration. The 9 winners to date have painted a picture of a people who proudly continue to shape the Canada that we know today. Genres include literary nonfiction, fiction, poetry, young readers literature, drama, screenplay, and musical. This $25,000 award is adjudicated by top Canadian authors with monetary recognition for both the winner and the winner's publisher.
So there we were. We'd celebrated 100 years of Ukrainian settlement in Canada in 1991. But for a lot of us, it became pretty apparent that in the literary world, our stories were not being heard. And so towards the end of the 90s, we started to develop an action plan as to how we would approach that. When I finally became Shevchenko president, one of the first initiatives we took was to talk to the publishing community, talk to authors, and talk to the philanthropic arm of the Ukrainian community. And it was clear that we had to actually give this thing a push. We had been in this land, collectively millions of years of experience, and yet Canadians did not understand our stories, or had not heard enough of our stories. So it was on the basis of that that we actually thought a literary award, properly funded, properly marketed, would be the spark to get us into that whole genre. Taras Shevchenko Foundation, literary genius, come on, let's do something. Let's move this along. And that's what started when we made the announcement in 2003. And the decades after, well, I'm really happy that we've managed to make all of that happen.
The KOBZAR Book Award is at the core of the Foundation's literary arts program, chaired until 2018 by Dr. Christine Turkiewicz. The program encourages young and emerging writers to pursue their passion and share their stories with writers' workshops, and most recently through the Emerging Writers Short Prose Competition.
The most important part of all of this is your support. Keep reading those books. Readership is everything. The more you read, the more you buy, the more you gift these books, the more the publishers will notice, and the more motivated our writers will be to continue writing. And that cycle has to be continued if we want to keep exposing this great talent to the world.
The inaugural KOBZAR Literary Award Ceremony was held in March 2006 in Toronto, where it found a home and a devoted audience through 8 awardings. All of the lavish ceremonies through 2020 were organized by a team of dedicated volunteers, led for 7 of those events by Alla Schklar, while the most recent in 2020 was chaired by Janice Taskey. The 2020 ceremony marked a shift in the program's evolution. With a new name and a new award, the time had come for the introduction to new audiences. Next up, Winnipeg. I'm especially excited about this part of the evening because we're going to be hearing from the 3 nominated authors. The author of Enemy Alien, the author of Fields of Light and Stone, and we'll be hearing from the author of Good Citizens Need Not Fear. We'll also be hearing from some of the past winners of the KOBZAR Book Award. Let's turn first to Danny Shure, who won the 2006.
Hello, it's Winnipeg composer, producer, writer Danny Shure. Along with my co-writing partner Rick Chafe, we were the inaugural co-winners of the KOBZAR National Literary Award for our stage musical, Strike, which told the story of Ukrainian Canadian immigrant everyman Mike Sokolowski, set against the 1919 Winnipeg General Strike. So when people ask, what does winning the KOBZAR mean to you? Here's what I say. The KOBZAR is a major national literary prize with attendant national publicity and acclaim. Winning the KOBZAR was instrumental in our 10-year journey of adapting the stage musical Strike into what became the movie musical Stand.
Forget about that Jewish girl in this Strike. She does not want to see you. Sokolowski, welcome to the revolution.
I think the purpose of art is not just to entertain, but to educate and edify. And so as a member of the KOBZAR Fellowship, as it were, it's my special obligation and privilege to tell stories of the Ukrainian Canadian experience that others wouldn't otherwise tell. One of the characters in my upcoming movie Spirit Lake, set against the First World War internment, says it best.
Because someday, if I'm not around, you have to be a witness and tell everyone that this happened. Do you think you can do that?
Where are you gonna be, Yurko?
Just promise.
Where are you gonna be?
It's just in case.
And speaking of the First World War internment, it's my pleasure and privilege to introduce the 2022 KOBZAR shortlisted author for her book, Enemy Alien, a true story of life behind barbed wire, Cassandra Lichuk.
My name is is Dr. Cassandra Lichuk. I'm an assistant professor of history at Dalhousie University, and I'm also the author of Enemy Alien, a true story of life behind barbed wire. It's based on the memoir of an internee who was held in Kapuskasing internment camp from 1914 to 1917. When the First World War begins, the Canadian government passes a piece of legislation known as the War Measures Act. One of its darkest legacies is that it justifies the opening of internment camps where anyone deemed to be a dangerous other was to be held for the duration of the war. And in total, we have about 8,500 people interned in Canada, the vast majority of whom were, of course, Ukrainians. I'm continuously surprised by how little attention internment receives and by how a lack of awareness about it persists. And so Enemy Alien is my attempt to fill this gap in our kind of collective historical lexicon. A graphic novel was the ideal format for this story because it's a medium that allows you to convey emotion, pain, lots of subtlety in ways that academic writing, which is what I'm most familiar with, just doesn't really allow. I want readers to forge connections to other histories, recognize this as a systemic issue, and in turn harness this understanding to shape their approach towards contemporary issues involving communities who could use their solidarity. We'll never truly understand or learn the lessons that we need to about the internment operations unless we hold accountable the system that allowed it to happen, which is now being used against others.
It's 1914 and war has broken out in Europe. As a British Dominion, Canada is automatically at war. As to our duty, all are agreed. We stand shoulder to shoulder with Britain and the other British Dominions in this quarrel. Men enlist by the thousands. Canadian industry quickly retools for wartime production. A patriotic fervor sweeps the nation.
Hey, you! Where are you from?
Galicia.
Come with us.
The police told me I had been stopped because I looked suspicious. This was nonsense. But under the law, they had the right to arrest and detain anyone with an Austro-Hungarian passport because of the war. I came to Canada because the government promised prosperity for migrants. But now they were arresting us and calling us enemy aliens, even though we were loyal to Canada. I later learned that 8,579 people were interned at 24 internment camps and receiving stations across the country. Another 80,000 people were forced to register with the police and report to them regularly. They brought us to the Stanley Barracks. Give your name, place of birth, age, and duration of residence in Canada. My name is John Boychuk. I was born in Krevci, Galicia. I am 22 years old. On the 23rd of December, they marched us to the train. Where are we going? Ontario. Toronto. Petawawa. Sault Ste. Marie. Kapuskasing. On Christmas Day, we arrived in Kapuskasing, then called McPherson Station. The soldiers took us to boxcars because no barracks had been built yet. Each car held 16 men. I don't remember much from that first night, except that it was minus 20 outside, and we were all very cold.
My name is Maurice Muro, and I was the winner of the KOBZAR Book Award in 2016 for my memoir, Detachment. Detachment is about adopting my sons in Ukraine in 2005. It's also the story of my father's childhood, fleeing World War II from Ukraine and settling with what remained of his family here in Winnipeg after the war. My father's family lived in a Mennonite village near Zaporizhia. Their lives would be shattered in the 20th century, both by Soviet pogroms and by the invasion of the Nazis during the Second World War. Today, in February, like many Ukrainian Canadians, I watch the news about Ukraine with great foreboding. I consider myself a proud Ukrainian Canadian, and so it is difficult to watch this, but it reminds me of why I wrote Detachment, and of course, it reminds me of my current book project, which carries the working title, My Translator Hates Me. This new book is about my son's struggle with mental illness, and also about the mental illness that emanates from the Kremlin and Putin's hateful lies about Ukraine. Several of my books have won national and regional awards. I can honestly say that the KOBZAR Award had the greatest meaning for me. That is for two reasons. One is because of my Ukrainian roots, and the other is because of the impact the award had on my career. It garnered national publicity for a small press book. It helped me sell books, raised my profile professionally, and it bought me research and writing time, which are the most valuable commodities for a writer. It is my honor to introduce Angeline Shellenberg, one of the authors shortlisted for the 2022 KOBZAR Literary Award. Her remarkable book of poems, Fields of Light and Stone, fills the reader with what she calls the extravagant sky that looms above not only traumatic history, but also family, food, nature, and words. Ladies and gentlemen, Angeline Shellenberg.
My name is Angeline Schellenberg. I am a poet, flash fiction writer. I host an open mic called Speaking Crow in Winnipeg. For fun, I do pottery, and I'm bad at it, but I love it. I come from this long line of women who are quilters and gardeners and canners and combine drivers and really active, hard workers. And I always felt like, well, what can I do? I've discovered that I'm a heart person who listens and creates through poetry, and also listens to others and looks for what God is creating in them. Fields of Light and Stone is a collection of elegies for all four of my Mennonite grandparents. So I started with my childhood memories of them and the conversations I had with them on their deathbeds. What I hope readers take away from reading my book is that as they read my very personal reflections of my own grandparents, it reminds them of theirs. And I've even heard some readers say that after reading my book, they remembered things they'd forgotten and they were inspired to sit down and write their own poems. I don't speak Ukrainian. I've never been to Ukraine. I don't have a Ukrainian name. I certainly don't do Ukrainian dance or cooking. But all my great-grandparents lived in southern Ukraine, and three of my grandparents were born there. The title of my book, Fields of Light and Stone, comes from the names of two of the villages in Mennonite Colony where my dad's parents were born. During the pandemic, I feel like finally the rest of the world is running at more of a poet's pace, like focusing on what's important, like it's about being with people. We're all starving for someone to listen deeply, and the poetry readings that I host do that.
These days, darkness slumps. Its pants slung low, hands in its pockets. I've stopped covering the tomatoes, but this morning rose 20 degrees fair. You return my hello, and we gulp time like breath. Even the wasp in my ear is translated. This may be the last day the wind does not hurt my cheeks. She perches on the edge of a piano bench in a field of light. It's 1919. In the Ukraine before famine, and Oma is singing. Her lips part so wide the extravagant sky may fall in. I perch on the edge of a stone flower bed in a field of dust. It's 1986, and Oma is pulling up red geraniums. Arthritis steadies her, gives her something painful to put her finger on. She moves, displaces air, her bones heavy with skimmed cream, her voice borrowed from crows, her arms soft petals. I perch on the edge of adulthood in Oma's hospital room. It's almost Easter, 1988. And Oma is inflated with cancer. Curled, she imagines peace, shrinks to fit inside. Her eyelids fly wide after her last breath. First glimpse. Falk, a falcon. From the Latin, a curved blade, a pruning hook, a talon, a beak, the spread of a wing. Or the Germanic fallow. Your line may have been falconers, or maybe we descended from the wild birds, diving into wild spaces.
Hi, I'm Dr. Lindy Ledachowski, scholar, educator, and now entrepreneur. I was also the winner of the 2018 KOBZAR Book Award for Unbound Ukrainian Canadians Writing Home, which I co-edited with Lisa Greco. A little bit about this book and what the Kobzar meant to us. Lisa Greco was the first person in Canada to do a dissertation on English language Ukrainian Canadian literature at a mainstream English department at the University of British Columbia. I followed in her footsteps a few short years later and did my PhD in English language Ukrainian Canadian literature in a mainstream English department at the University of Toronto. We became colleagues and then friends. And when the opportunity presented itself to us in 2011 to pull together a book on what it means to be Ukrainian Canadian in contemporary Canada, we jumped at the opportunity. Now, for me, I've long been of the belief that any group community has as many differences and diversity amongst its voices as it has similarities. And so what better way to tackle the question of what it means to be Ukrainian Canadian in contemporary Canada than to ask a number of Ukrainian Canadian authors that very question and give them free latitude in their answers. And that became the guiding principle of what then became this KOBZAR Award-winning book. We had authors who are poets, essayists, storytellers, young adult authors, fiction writers, memoirists, filmmakers, all looking through their lens at the question of what does it mean to be Ukrainian in contemporary Canada. And we have a multiplicity of voices that breaks genders and tackles that question. And the ultimate answer is that there are many ways to be Ukrainian Canadian in contemporary Canada. And it is a book that both Lisa Greckwell and I and all of our contributors are tremendously proud of. And what did it mean for us to win the KOBZAR Award? Well, all of us, all of the contributors, then colleagues and now friends, thought of ourselves as outsiders, many of us not belonging to mainstream Ukrainian or Ukrainian Canadian community groups with our own various different approaches and feelings about what our ethnic identity means to us. So we thought, well, the KOBZAR Award, that's a long shot for us. And so while it was very gratifying to make the shortlist, we didn't think that we had hope of winning. And when we did win, it was such a validation for us as seemingly outsiders, a group of women, a group of authors, a group of people, some of whom spoke Ukrainian, many of whom didn't, writing our truths about what it meant to be Ukrainian in today's Canada. For me personally, the time that we won the KOBZAR Award, I had left my job as a full-time professor and I had begun my career, which I'm in now, as an edtech professional. And as an edtech professional, I thought this book, Unbound, may well be the last thing that I say on what it means to be Ukrainian in Canada. And I was so very proud to take home this award that said that that contribution, those things that I wanted to say and those things that I believe in, mattered to more people than just myself. And it is my great honor and privilege to introduce to you today another voice, Maria Riva, for her book, Good Citizens Need Not Fear. Another voice articulating what it means to be Ukrainian in today's Canada.
My name is Maria Riva. What inspired my book was kind of a random conversation I had with my parents over lunch. We were talking about the building we lived in Ukraine before moving to Canada. The heating wouldn't come on. So my dad went to the city hall and he asked them, okay, what's going on? Maybe you just forgot to hook it up. And they looked up the address in their directory and they couldn't find it. So they told him, well, if there's no such address, there's no such building. And so my dad went on to this bureaucratic goose chase to all the other municipal authorities trying to prove that our building existed. As soon as I heard that story, I thought, my God, that's so rich for a story. I need to absolutely write this down. And I did, and that turned into the first story, Novostroika. After I wrote that story, I was wondering, okay, what are the other tenants doing in this building that supposedly doesn't exist? Writing the other stories, it kind of felt like I was walking through this building and turning on the lights and seeing how these families were living. They were like these tableaus that kind of flashed how they reinvent themselves, how they're constantly adapting to their environment. I think that is inspiring, at least to me, and makes me think of our current times with the pandemic, that despite what we're seeing on the news and the terrible things that are happening, we are going to get through this. We are going to reinvent ourselves. We're going to adapt. And I really believe that.
The statue of Grandfather Lenin, just like the one in Moscow, 900 kilometers away, squinted into the smoggy distance. Winter's first snowflakes settled on its iron shoulders like dandruff. Even as Danil Petrovich Blinov passed the statue and climbs the crumbling steps of the town council, he feels the grandfather's 360-degree gaze on the back of his head, burning through his fur flap hat. Inside the town council hall, a line of hunched figures, men and women and their entire families, warm their hands on the radiators. They progress towards a wall of glass partitions. Danil enters the line, waits. He rocks back and forth on the sides of his feet and flexes his calves to promote circulation. Next! Danil steps forward, bends down to the hole in the partition, and speaks to the bespectacled woman behind it. I'm here to report a heating problem in our building. What's the problem? We have no heat. He explained that the building was a new one. This winter was its first, and someone seemed to have forgotten to connect it to the district furnace, and the toilet water froze in the night. The bespectacled woman heaves a thick directory onto her counter. Building address, Ivansk Street, number 1933. She flips through the book, licks her finger every few pages, flips and flips, consults the index, flips once more, shuts the book, folds her arms. That building does not exist, citizen. What do you mean? I live there. Not according to the documentation, you don't. 1933 Ivansk Street. Never heard of it. I have 14 people living in my suite alone who can come here and tell you all about it. 14 angry citizens bundled up twice their size. The documentation, citizen. We'll keep using the gas then. We'll leave the stove on day and night. Would that be a good use of a government-subsidized resource? Address again, 1933 Ivansk Street, Kirovka, Ukraine, USSR, Mother Earth. Yes, yes. We will have the gas engineering department look at it. Next! Was it 14 now? Had he included himself in the count? Careful to avoid the ice patches on the sidewalk on his way home, Danil wondered when he had let the numbers of people who live in his suite elude him. Last month, 12 people, including himself. He counted on his cold, stiff fingers. Baba Ola, and Inya, and Uncle Timko, and their 3 small children. Then Danil's niece and her friend, but they hardly counted since they ate little and spent most of their time at the Institute. Danil himself, Uncle Timko's mother, Great Aunt Nika, on the balcony, second cousin Glebik, his fiancée, and their 6 hens, which were not included in the count, but who could forget the damn noisy birds? And someone's mother-in-law or second cousin, or who really knew? Danil's name had bounced from waitlist to waitlist for 3 years before he was assigned his apartment by the Kirovka Canning Combine, where he worked as a packaging specialist. The 10-story paneled Novostroyka was newly built and still smelt of mortar. His 5th-floor suite was no larger than the single room he had shared with his parents in a communal apartment, but he could call it his own. The day he moved in had been nothing short of sublime. He walked to his sink, filled a glass of water, guzzled it down, then lay on the kitchen floor with his legs squeezed into a gap between the stove and table. Home was where one could lie in peace on any surface. He felt fresh and full of hope. Then, a knock on the door. Daniil's grandmother, Baba Ola, burst into the apartment with 4 mildewy sacks of grain and a cage full of hens strapped to her back. She ranted in Ukrainian, which Daniil barely understood because he was raised and educated in Russian. Baba Ola cursed her neighbor, who either was in love with her or had it in for her and had threatened to poison himself or her, or perhaps both. Daniil simply nodded, ashamed to ask for clarification, and so Baba Ola stayed. 2. 2 had been fine, until 2 became 14.
Wow, such incredible writing. So many different perspectives on it, from the writers themselves, from people who've been judges before and won before. I need to know more about this, but first of all, I have to say, Luba, thank you. It is so fantastic to see you again. And your interpretation of Maria Riva's book, you find humor in a very difficult situation. Let's go, though, and ask the adjudicators, the jurists, about what they're thinking. Okay, come on, my zoomies. Leisha, hi.
Hi. Good to see you.
Nice fireplace behind you. That looks lovely.
Thank you.
How are things at the bird sanctuary today?
Oh, they're great. It's a bit cool. It's bright and sunny, which is lovely. I think some of the migratory birds that started turning up early have since maybe gone back south a bit. But yeah, it's beautiful.
So about this time last year, you were walking away with the KOBZAR Award in the 2020 awards at the Palais Royal in Toronto. What's the difference between 2 years ago and what's happening right now?
Oh, what isn't different? Yeah, so I was so honored to be nominated, and even before going to the ceremonies, there was a lot of news about this new virus and the possibility of a pandemic. So it was actually a hard decision to make whether or not to go to the ceremony in Toronto. We did decide to go, and I was very thankful for that. And when we were in flight on the way from BC to Toronto is when the pandemic was announced. So the KOBZAR 2020 awards were really, quite literally, my last hurrah. It was a big award ceremony. We were seeing people in person. There were lovely canapes. No one knew what was coming next. So it was, yeah, very memorable. It would have been otherwise, but even more so.
Ben Sigurdsson is standing by in front of his glorious bookshelf. Hello, Ben.
How you doing?
I'm great. Have you read all those books?
Well, this half is mine and the other half is my partner's. So I've read some of these and fewer of these.
Now, we all know you in Winnipeg as the books review columnist for the Winnipeg Free Press, but also some of us also pay more attention perhaps to your writing about alcohol than about your books. No offense. But so you write about wine and spirits and beer.
Yeah,
right?
I've been the Free Press wine and drinks writer, I guess, for about 16 years. And I've been doing the literary editor, books editor stuff for about 8 years now. And so it's it combines two of my favorite things. I paid my way through my English degree by working at wine stores. And now the two have reconvened and here I am.
Do you drink and read at the same time?
Almost exclusively. I'm just kidding. If I did, I'd have a serious problem on my hands. But no, I like to, sometimes I do actually think about, what might go well with a certain type of book or something like that,
And Carrie Claire is with us as well. Carrie, you're in Toronto. Do I have that right?
Yes, I'm in Toronto today where it's pouring rain.
How are your pickles?
Yep, they're pickling.
Do you have a pickles blog? Is that right?
I do. Once upon a time, I actually wanted to pickle things and I wasn't good at that. But I loved the name Pickle Me This. And so I transferred it to my blog once I started that a few years ago. And so I'm much better at blogging than pickling. You don't need to measure things out so exactly.
You also have a website that pays a lot of attention to books and writing, 49th Shelf, right?
Yes, 49th Shelf is the platform for all things Canadian books, which means every kind of book imaginable, not just sort of cliched can lit, anything published by a Canadian writer. And so it's lots of fun to celebrate those books, and I really enjoy it.
What kind of a challenge was it? There were 11 entries. You got them down to 3 on the short list. What was the challenge of choosing the 3 books that you did? And Carrie, perhaps you could answer that first.
It was, first of all, before it was a challenge, it was just a pleasure. The great thing about this award is that all kinds of books, it's not just for fiction. As you can see by the shortlist, all kinds of books can be contenders. And so it was just a real pleasure to look at a whole bunch of different books together and understand what the connections were and what the differences were. But yes, that made it challenging too, because it's such a huge it's such a wide range of works we're dealing with. So that was exciting, but it was also challenging.
Now, Ben Sigurdsson, if I have it right, your last name is of Icelandic descent. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And what was it like for you to take such a deep dive into Ukrainian Canadian sensibilities?
You know, I really appreciated it. I mean, you know, there's such an interesting sort of different diversity of cultures that sort of came to Manitoba and shaped, you know, where we live. But, you know, we each sort of, you know, came from different places, had different perspectives. And I really, really enjoyed working through these books and just learning more about the Ukrainian Canadian experience, like Carrie said. The connections that they had and the ways in which they were interpreted, and the shortlist, which, you know, reflects that, you know, 3 different genres entirely, all of which captured something very unique about the Ukrainian Canadian experience, I feel.
Lisa, we just heard from Ben Sigurdsson about, you know, being of Icelandic descent, but plunging in deeply into the Ukrainian Canadian condition and history. And what was it like for you sifting and sorting these 3 books and coming down to 3 very diverse books with the same source of inspiration?
Well, first and foremost, reading the long list was an absolute pleasure. And the challenge and difficulty with any jury is trying to get that down to 3. And being of Ukrainian Canadian descent myself, I felt like so many of the different books I read spoke to different aspects of that. The 3 that we eventually chose, I feel like they not only are they such diverse forms of books and genres, they each speak with some overlap to a very diverse, broad range of the Ukrainian Canadian experience, and in ways that I felt were impactful, powerful, deeply moving, and that I could really relate to, not only in terms of the generational connection with Ukraine and being a Ukrainian Canadian, but just as a contemporary Canadian to do with the diversity of experience and multiculturalism and the issues that each of the books was addressing.
Now, I feel an obligation to ask all 3 of you for a hint about the winner. What can you tell me?
It's one of these 3, and that's all I'll say.
Okay, well, thank you for being so oblique about your reply. I appreciate that, because we are about to answer the question, who is the winner? Thank you, adjudicators, jurists. I appreciate all your work. Thanks for the opportunity for the wonderful reading. And I'll see you in 2 years' time in 2024, by which time we hope the pandemic will be thoroughly gone. Thanks again.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks. Thanks so much.
Congratulations to all the shortlistees.
I don't know about you, but I need to know who has won the 2022 KOBZAR Book Award. I can't wait anymore. We've been hearing about these magnificent books from our fantastic panel of judges about what they liked about the books, what struck them, what was deep about Canadian-Ukrainian life, and what these books mean to people beyond Canadian-Ukrainian life. So let's find out now who the winner is of the 2022 KOBZAR Book Award.
I'd like to thank the Shevchenko Foundation for this award. This foundation was one of the first organizations to support my writing with the travel grant back in 2012 to conduct research in Ukraine, and some of that material made it into my book. This award feels to me like a homecoming, and I'm very grateful, and it'll be a huge help for future projects. As the Russian army attempts to destroy Ukrainian culture and Ukrainian identity, it's organizations like this one that help keep it thriving. Thank you.
Maria Riva, Good Citizens Need Not Fear. If you haven't read this book, you are in for an extra special treat. All the books nominated this year for the KOBZAR Award are magnificent. This particular one is deep and complex and funny and scary and detailed, and it's getting acclaim all over the world. So Maria Riva, congratulations. We are thrilled to offer you the 2022 KOBZAR Award. Maria Riva receives $20,000 for her portion of the prize, and her publisher, Knopf, receives $5,000. Thank you so much for joining us on this broadcast. Thank you so much for joining us on this Zoom, and we'll be back in 2024, live and in person. See you then.
Слава Україні! Слава героям! Де моя курка? Де моя коровка? No коровkas in the suite. Read the book. Maria Riva is a wonderful writer. Good citizens need not fear. Right, курка? Тихо, курка. Добраніч.
Oops, I didn't turn my phone off. Sorry, that is...
Will this keep going after the phone comes off?
Sorry about
Uh-oh.
Oh boy.
It'll be fine.
It'll be fine.
It'll be fine.
I don't know. You're frozen over there. I don't know if you can still hear us.
Terry and Ryan are frozen.
I'm sure that won't happen again.
No. They can fix it in post.